Democratic voters were recently polled on how they identify themselves as Democrats. And the most common answer, which I thought was interesting, was Obama Democrat. And what this does is shows the degree to which Barack Obama has a hold on the party's imagination, even a few years after he finished his term in office. But while that's the case, the conduct of the Republican Party, in terms of the nomination of Merrick Garland, and since the election of Donald Trump, has shaken for a lot of people their mental models of how politics works. So as we enter 2020, the question becomes, how do you think about the Obama legacy and the politics that we have now post-Obama? A great person to discuss that with is one of President Obama's closest advisors and friends, Valerie Jarrett, who has a new memoir out today called Finding My Voice, My Journey to the West Wing and the Path Forward. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Chris. Delighted to be here.
This book talks about your life, which is fascinating. You were born in Iran. Your parents have a fascinating story, and it talks about your trajectory through Chicago politics and then in the West Wing. What is your big takeaway? What was the thing that you walked into those 8 years thinking, and you came out being like, I was wrong about that?
That's easy. My biggest mistake was not appreciating how willing the Republicans were to put their short-term political interests ahead of our country. I mean, just remember, Chris, when President Obama took office, we were in the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, losing 750,000, 800,000 jobs a month. We had 2 wars going on. We had a crisis in terms of housing, a crisis, people losing their homes, millions of people losing their homes, losing their jobs. No safety net of affordable health care. We had a lot going wrong in this country, and I thought it would be a time where Republicans would come to the table and work with President Obama for the greater good. And it took me a while to realize, no, they just weren't going to do that. They were going to, time and time again, just say no.
What was that realization like in real time?
It was painful because we tried everything. You know, we tried intimidating them. We tried wooing them. We tried taking them out to dinner. We tried coming up with plans that had traditionally enjoyed bipartisan support. Every possible thing. And what I did not appreciate naively was, no, they didn't actually care about that. And I think it probably came to a head for me when we were dealing with the fiscal crisis and whether or not to go over the fiscal cliff and default for the first time in our nation's history on a full faith and credit of our currency, which obviously affects the world economy. And I heard members of the then Tea Party saying, oh, it'd be good for the United States to default. Teach us a lesson. Really? Shake up the entire world economic system to teach us a lesson? And what would be the lesson? We'd already approved the budget to use those funds. All they were doing was simply allowing us to have the debt that supported that budget.
So then I guess the question becomes, so that's a big lesson. I think a lot of people follow that trajectory. There are other people who out in front were like, the Republicans are never going to work with you, right? They were saying that from day one.
Yes, but we had to get caught trying. I thought it was really important that we get caught
trying. So you don't think it was a mistake? It wasn't. There are people who say, for instance, that the months that were put into trying to get, Max Baucus to work with Republicans to try to get something out of committee of the ACA, there are people who say that was wasted time, that was a mistake. You don't think it? You don't see it as a mistake?
The way I look at it, at that time, what we thought is it was very important that once you're president of the United States of America, and that means all of America. And the people with whom you have to work are those who've been duly elected by Americans, and that, in this case, is the Republicans. And we thought it was important to try to have a bipartisan bill. Anytime you do something this big and this bold, optimally, you'd want it to be partisan.
Is that a political calculation, or is that a first principles calculation?
I think it's a first principle of governance of the entire country.
Is it a defeatable first principle? You see what I'm saying? Meaning, if that's your first principle, do the facts on the ground after a certain period of time change that? Like if Valerie Jarrett were hired as the senior most strategic advisor to the next Democratic president coming in, say, were to be elected, big first domestic policy legislation, you've been in there, you've been in the trenches before. Do you say, yeah, let's go get a meeting with Tom Cotton and see if he'll work with us on this climate bill?
Well, I think you do have to try. The question is, how long do you go at it? And ultimately, we did go it alone. We did make the political calculus, the government practice, that it was more important to get affordable health care for all of America than to get a bipartisan bill. But it was important to us to try, and to try every way possible, because I think that's what's fair for the American people to expect of us. I think to do it again, we probably spent so much time trying to get the policy right. I wish that we had told the story earlier to the American people. Now they appreciate the Affordable Care Act and all of the benefits in it. And I think at the time, it just seemed like sausage in Washington. And so I wish we'd gotten outside of Washington and told the story earlier in the process so that they could have put pressure on their elected representatives, because now it does enjoy bipartisan support.
Is there anything that Donald Trump does that you think yourself, as someone who spent 8 years, right, if I'm not mistaken, in that White House?
8 years to the day.
It's a long time.
It is a long time.
Is there anything Donald Trump does you think, I wish we'd done that?
No, actually, no.
Not a single thing. There's nothing he does.
Nothing pops to my mind. What do you think? Does something pop to your mind that he did right, that we did wrong?
I think, I will tell you, Barack Obama was an incredible campaigner and incredible in public settings and rallies. And going along with what your point is about sort of the inside strategy of legislation, I do think there was a sort of bully pulpit.
Yes.
Particularly in those first 6 to 12 months where you didn't see him out in the trail. You didn't see him out doing, and this president has never stopped doing that, right? I mean, it's probably his favorite part of the job. It's part of the reason. And I do wonder sometimes whether that would have made an effect.
Well, that was the point I was making earlier. And I think that there has to be some symmetry between the substance and the rallies. But I do wish that we had spent more time traveling around the country explaining the substance of what we were trying to do so that the folks who understood that it would be important in their lives would have put some pressure on. And that perhaps would have brought Republicans to the table. Although I'm not sure, because I think that at that point, they just felt like saying no to every single thing we tried to do was their political strategy. But it's not a strategy for good government.
But there's a question, right, about how much that's a permanent structural feature now of American politics. I mean, I think...
Well, I hope not. I hope what will happen is that the American people will say, you know what, I don't like that. I don't think compromise is a bad word. I do want the people who are elected to represent me to be keeping me top of mind. When you start talking about not passing the Affordable Care Act or now repealing it, really? Really? 1 in 2 Americans has a pre-existing condition and you want to take that away? You want women to not have preventive care? You want young people to not be able to stay on their parents' plans? You want senior citizens to go back to not being able to afford their prescription drugs, or everyone reaching like lifetime or annual caps? Is that what you want for America? I don't think so.
But they are saying that's what they want. I mean, at a certain point, you have to think about the word,
well,
right?
You know, it's interesting, though. You say that's what they want, but they haven't repealed it.
Yeah,
at a time when they had control of Congress, they could have, and they didn't. Why? Because people showed up at those town halls, and they said, no, I have a pre-existing condition. I'm counting on the ACA. 20 million people had health care, many for the first time. We're saying, no, don't repeal it. And when that happens, I think the elected representatives respond. And so that's what I wish that we had done at the same time as we were trying to fix the economy and end 2 wars and capture Osama bin Laden and reduce our dependence on foreign oil and improve our education system. We had a lot going on, but telling the story is very important. Keeping people understanding that you're fighting for them is really important. You can't just know it in your own heart. You have to communicate it to them.
I've seen reports that President Barack Obama, who is working on his own memoir right now, has had taken meetings with various folks that are running for the Democratic nomination for president. I think he's open about that. He'll meet with people and talk to them, give his advice. If you were doing that,
I have done that.
So you have done that. What's your big advice? Like, what do you tell people?
Well, a few things. Generally, what I say is this: be authentic. Figure out what you stand for and communicate it openly and honestly to the American people. They can sniff it out if you're fake. And so don't be busy trying to figure out what poll tests the right answer. Tell them what you think and give them the reason why they should trust you, which means they have to get to know you. President Obama used to say, you know, when he was in Iowa, I got to lift up my hood and let people kick the tires and really understand who I am as a person and what kind of a president I will be for them. And I think candidates need to do that. The other thing I think they have to do is have an affirmative message for what they're for. Particularly right now in the Democratic Party, what I would not want to see them do is to be so busy beating each other up that they go into the general election in a weakened position, because that's actually what the party needs to do, is to win the general election. And so those are the 2 big pieces of advice that I've given everybody.
A final question. You know, you were part of the Obama's social circle and lies sort of as they were on this crazy trajectory that there's been nothing like it, I think, probably since Abraham Lincoln, basically, right? In terms of, you know, state senator to senator, president of the United States so quickly. How did it change you? How did it change them?
Well, I think Michelle Obama said this really well during the Democratic Convention in 2012. She said, People often ask me, has being president changed my husband? And I say, no, it hasn't changed him. It's revealed who he is. And I think it tested all of us. We found out whether we could take a punch. We found out whether or not we could keep focused on what was important, and that was long-term solutions to the challenges that we have, or whether we would succumb to politics. I think we all mature, we all grow, we all learn from the experience, but I think your basic core values are pretty well set by the time you reach adulthood.
All right, Valerie Jarrett, the book is called Finding My Voice. It's out today. It's a great pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Chris.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.